Why was everyone staring at her like she didn't belong? The briefing room at Fob Ranger Point buzzed with diesel fumes, tension, and the dry rustle of paper maps. Dust sifted down from the ceiling fans as a dozen men leaned over tables covered in route sketches and satellite photos. And in the middle of it all, a small woman in faded ACUs, boots barely touching the floor, hands clasped tight in her lap like she was trying to hold something fragile from breaking. Hadley Pierce had been through worse than stares. Worse than the jokes, too. But when Staff Sergeant Doyle sneered across the room and said, "That little girl playing doctor has no business out here with real soldiers," she felt it, that sharp, electric stillness that comes before something in your chest either cracks or hardens forever. She didn't crack. 6 hours later, Doyle's femoral artery was painting the dirt crimson. And the only thing between her squad and total annihilation was the medic they swore couldn't fight. But that moment hadn't come yet. For now, it was just another morning at Ranger Point, dry wind outside, the metallic rattle of Humvee engines, men chewing dip and spitting into empty water bottles while the lieutenant ran through the mission brief. The next convoy was rolling out through Chuck Canoe Ridgeway Pass, a stretch of highway one every soldier in Korash Province knew by name. IED country. No second chances. Hadley adjusted the straps of her medical pack, the one that weighed half as much as she did. At 5'4" and built like a runner, she didn't look like someone who could carry a grown man to safety, but her arms told another story. Quiet strength, earned from years of hauling hay bales across her family's ranch outside Cheyenne, Wyoming. She'd been setting broken bones in cattle since age 12. Back then, the patients didn't argue with her because she was small or female. They just stood still and trusted her to fix what was broken. These men weren't cattle, and trust came harder here. "Pierce," Doyle called from across the tent, voice dripping with sarcasm, "make sure you pack enough Band-Aids for the big boys." Laughter rippled through the squad. She didn't look up. Her hands moved with calm precision, checking her hemostatic agents, counting chest seals, double-tapping syringes. She learned a long time ago that answering back never changed minds, saving lives did. And when the time came, she'd let her work speak for itself. Outside, the wind picked up, a low, dry howl through the metal siding of the forward operating base. She closed her eyes for a second, listening to it. That sound always took her home. Wyoming plains, cold mornings, her grandfather's steady voice behind her. Medics don't just patch holes, Hadley. They hold the line between bringing your brothers home alive or zipped in boxes. He'd been a Vietnam corpsman, the kind of man who taught her that medicine under fire wasn't about fearlessness. It was about steadiness. When cancer started hollowing him out, he'd still sit her at the kitchen table, stack old Navy manuals in front of her and make her practice stitches on raw chicken while he fired his .308 Winchester outside. She had to thread the needle without flinching through the gunfire. "Chaos is your classroom," he'd say. "Learn to think in it." She had, and it had led her here. At 19, she'd been an EMT in Cleveland, running calls through neighborhoods where gunshots were Friday night background noise. She'd learned to drive an ambulance through sirens and panic, to patch bleeding strangers in alleys lit by police floodlights. The Army had come calling after one of those nights, after she'd saved a kid who everyone said was already gone. She worked him for 40 straight minutes, chest compressions, intubation, pressure on 3 bullet wounds. When he woke up 6 weeks later, he asked for her by name. That was the night she decided to trade city streets for desert dust. At Fort Carson, she graduated top of her class in Combat Medic School, MOS 68W, and stayed for extra training with the Recon Medical Instructors, a brutal regimen of stress drills, triage under fire, and live fire casualty extraction. She wasn't part of their special regiment, but she absorbed everything they threw at her. Her instructors used to joke that she had ice in her veins. She preferred to think of it as something else, focus. Because fear could wait until after. Now, sitting in the convoy staging area, she could feel the old doubts creeping up again, the sideways glances, the silent judgment. The kind that said, "You're here because of some equality policy, not because you belong." She tightened the strap on her pack, jaw clenched. Belonging wasn't given, it was earned. And she'd earn it the hard way. "All right, listen up," Lieutenant Briggs called. "We move in 20, same route as yesterday, eyes open through the Ridgeway choke. Intel's been reporting more chatter from the western hills." Doyle snorted. "Intel's always reporting chatter. Doesn't mean anyone's dumb enough to hit us again." Hadley didn't respond, but she noticed the way the lieutenant's shoulders tightened. He'd read the same reports she had: unusual radio traffic, a couple of locals disappearing from nearby villages, satellite pings suggesting new heat signatures along the ridges. All the signs of something building. The kind of signs that made the old hands quiet. She went through her pre-mission checks: M4, mags, trauma shears, cat tourniquets, everything in its place, everything ready for the moment it all went sideways. The call came to mount up, boots on metal steps, the thud of gear hitting seats. She climbed into the back of the MRAP, sliding in next to Specialist Harris, the gunner. He gave her a nod, polite, distant, better than usual. The rest of the team busied themselves checking comms, laughing, pretending the day was routine. But she could feel it, that tension before impact. The kind you learn to respect. She pressed her gloved hands to her temples for a moment, breathing slow. Not to calm herself, she wasn't nervous. She just needed focus. Her grandfather's voice echoed in the silence of her mind. "Steady pressure, Hadley. Death doesn't care if you're scared, so don't be." The convoy rolled out. Dust clouds rose behind the armored trucks, sunlight flashing off their antennas. The landscape blurred: barren hills, broken villages, goat trails winding through fields that looked harmless but weren't. Hadley watched through the small, armored window, counting seconds between each turn, each dip in the road. Every shadow could hide an IED trigger wire. Every mound could be a grave. She was cataloging landmarks when the radio crackled, an edge in the driver's voice. "Something feels off, you see that?" The explosion cut him off. The lead MRAP vanished in a wall of fire and dirt. The blast hit Hadley's vehicle like a hammer, throwing her against the seatbelt. For half a second there was silence, then gunfire erupted from the ridges. Automatic bursts, dozens of them. The convoy commander shouted orders. Rounds pinged off armor. Smoke and sand turned the world gray. Through the haze, she saw what no medic wants to see: bodies crawling from the burning truck ahead, men down. And then the worst call over the radio. Medic down, senior medics hit truck 1. Her pulse spiked just once, then steadied. The vehicle commander grabbed her shoulder. "Stay put, Doc, we're getting chewed up out there." But through the cracked glass, she could see Doyle's fire team pinned 30 meters away. One man was dragging another behind a twisted door. Doyle himself was sprawled in the open, motionless, blood pooling beneath his leg. Machine gun fire raked the dirt around him. Her hands clenched on the straps of her pack. "Stay put, no, not today." Above, the gunner slumped forward, hit in the thigh, blood running down his leg. Without him, the .50 cal went silent, and silence meant death for everyone. Hadley grabbed her trauma shears, pulled herself up through the turret into the open. Bullets hissed past like hornets. She found the wound through and through, not arterial, slapped a dressing on it, tied it tight, and smacked his helmet. "Harris, you're good. Get back on that 50. He nodded, teeth gritted, and opened fire again, cutting down the nearest attackers. The sound was deafening. The recoil shook the turret. It gave her cover just enough. She dropped back inside, grabbed her rifle and medpack, and kicked the door open. Then she ran straight into the kill zone. The world shrank to gunfire, dust, and heartbeat. She moved low, fast, using the debris for cover. Training took over. One insurgent appeared on her flank. She dropped him with 2 clean shots. Another muzzle flash. She dove, rolled, returned fire. The rhythm was mechanical now, each movement precise. Reaching Doyle, she saw it immediately. Femoral bleed high in the thigh. 4 minutes, maybe less. She didn't speak, she acted. Tourniquet high and tight. Combat gauze packed deep. Direct pressure where the artery vanished into the pelvis. Her gloves were slick with his blood, but her hands didn't shake. "Stay with me," she said, voice calm, almost gentle. "You're not dying out here, not like this." His eyes fluttered open, wide with pain and disbelief. You came out here." "Yeah," she said, pressing harder. "And I'm not leaving till you're stable. Now look at that ridge and call out movement. That's how you help me." Beside him, another soldier was gasping, chest rising unevenly, a punctured lung. She pivoted, drew a catheter, jammed it between his ribs, and heard the hiss of trapped air release. The man's breathing steadied. She sealed the wound, then went back to Doyle. "Pressure's holding," she murmured to herself. "Come on, you stubborn bastard." Her rifle lay across her lap, barrel smoking. She used her knee to keep pressure on the wound, eyes scanning the ridge, more movement. She grabbed the weapon, fired 3 times, center mass, each shot deliberate. The enemy dropped. Somewhere behind her, the radio screamed, "QRF inbound, 5 mics out." She didn't hear it. She was already moving to the next casualty, voice low, steady as the gunfire faded. Her world had narrowed to heartbeats, breaths, and the sound of Doyle whispering her name. When the medevac finally came, rotor wash tearing through the smoke, she stood near the landing zone, uniform soaked in blood that wasn't hers. The Black Hawk lifted off carrying Doyle and 2 others, alive because of her hands. The dust blew across her face, stinging her eyes. First Sergeant Cole walked up beside her, voice gruff. "Pierce, that was hell out there. They're putting you in for a Bronze Star with valor." She didn't answer right away, just watched the helicopter fade into the orange haze. Finally she whispered, "They're alive, that's enough." Why did silence always feel louder after a battle? The rotor noise faded into the sky, leaving only the hum of generators and the soft clatter of shell casings in the wind. Hadley Pierce stood in the middle of the clearing, helmet under her arm, her sleeves stiff with blood that had already begun to dry. Around her, the platoon moved like ghosts, collecting rifles, counting rounds, whispering names of the wounded over cracked radios. The air smelled of diesel, iron, and burned sand. She should have felt relief. Instead, she felt nothing, just the hollow rhythm of her pulse. A voice broke through the static, "Doc, you good?" She turned. Harris, the gunner she'd patched up mid-fight, was limping toward her. His thigh was bandaged, streaked brown from dust and blood. He gave a half-smile, half-grimace. "You saved my leg," he said. "Didn't even have time to thank you." Hadley shook her head. "Save it for when you're off painkillers." He laughed once, then winced. "Guess I owe you a drink." "You owe me a clean gun," she said softly, and he chuckled again before heading back to help with the wounded. When the last of the casualties were loaded, she followed the convoy back to Fob Ranger Point. Nobody spoke during the drive. The Humvee rocked with the rhythm of the road, every bump a reminder of how close they'd come. She stared out the window, ridges, empty sky, the same land that had swallowed so many before them. The desert never apologized. It only waited for the next patrol. Back at base, debriefing began immediately. Officers wanted reports, times, wound locations, ammunition counts. They called it documentation. To Hadley, it felt like an autopsy of luck. She sat in the corner of the operations tent, answering every question in clipped, professional tones. Yes, Sergeant Doyle sustained a femoral bleed. Yes, the tourniquet was applied high on the proximal thigh, estimated blood loss, about 1.5 liters. No one asked how she'd managed to cross 30 meters of open ground under fire. No one asked how she'd kept her hands steady. Maybe they already knew not to. When it was over, Lieutenant Briggs stopped her at the exit. He looked younger than usual, exhaustion lining his face. "Specialist Pierce," he said, "you kept this platoon breathing today. You know that." She nodded once. He hesitated, then added quietly, "For what it's worth, Doyle's stable. Surgeon said your field work was textbook." Her throat tightened, but she just said, "He'll live. That's what matters." Outside, the evening sun washed the compound gold. She crossed the yard toward the med tent, boots crunching over gravel. Every step echoed. Men turned to watch her pass, some with respect, others with the awkward guilt of those who'd once doubted her. She felt their eyes but kept walking. Praise wasn't what she came for. Inside the aid station, she scrubbed her hands raw under the water. The sink ran red, then pink, then clear. She stared at her reflection in the small mirror above it, eyes rimmed with dust, lips cracked, hair matted beneath the helmet line. The woman staring back didn't look like the medic who'd first arrived 3 months ago. That girl had wanted to prove herself. This one had already seen the cost. That night the base was quiet except for the distant rumble of generators. She sat alone outside the barracks, medical log open on her lap, writing notes in careful, cramped script. Patient A, Doyle, femoral arterial laceration stabilized. Patient B, Reeves, pneumothorax, needle decompression successful. The ink bled slightly on the paper from the desert humidity. She paused mid-sentence, listening to the night. A single gunshot echoed far off, probably a warning round from the perimeter. Then stillness again. Her thoughts drifted back to Cleveland. The sirens, the cold rain, the first time she'd realized that saving lives sometimes meant carrying the weight of those you couldn't save. Out here, that truth pressed heavier. She closed the logbook, leaned back against the wall, and looked at the stars. The same constellations her grandfather used to trace on the Wyoming sky. He'd called them navigation lights for lost souls. Maybe that's what she was now, one of the lost, trying to find meaning in a place that kept stealing it. Morning came with the metallic clang of the mess hall doors and the sour smell of instant coffee. The squad gathered for roll call. Doyle's seat at the end of the table sat empty, his tray untouched. "Pierce," First Sergeant Cole called, "you're on limited duty today. Command wants you to rest up." "I'm fine, First Sergeant," she replied. He raised an eyebrow. That wasn't a suggestion. She gave a small nod and sat back. Around her, conversation started and died in awkward bursts. No jokes this morning, just quiet chewing and the clatter of utensils. When someone finally spoke, it was Specialist Reeves, bandaged chest, pale face. "Doc," he said, voice rough, "I heard what you did out there. Didn't even think you'd make it to us." Hadley met his gaze. "You were worth the run." He smiled weakly. "Guess Doyle owes you a lifetime of apologies." "Guess so," she said, though her tone carried no triumph. When the briefing for the next mission started later that week, something had changed. No one interrupted her when she spoke. No smirks, no muttered comments. She was just Doc Pierce now, the medic who'd run through gunfire. But inside, she didn't feel like a hero. The images replayed every time she blinked. Doyle's wide eyes, the blood poolsing between her fingers, the silence after the shots stopped. You can save a body, she thought, but the mind takes longer. That night she couldn't sleep. She walked the perimeter wall instead, boots tracing the line of sandbags. The air was cold, almost kind. Somewhere beyond the wire, the hills loomed dark, dotted with faint lights, villages or something else. She caught herself listening, half expecting the same voice that haunted her dreams, her grandfather's low whisper. "Remember, kid, dignity doesn't speak, it acts." She closed her eyes and breathed. Maybe that was the lesson. Maybe that was why she was still here. A week later, the medevac helicopter returned. Doyle stepped out on crutches, his leg wrapped in layers of bandage and brace. The platoon gathered near the landing pad, quiet, waiting. He hobbled straight toward her. No swagger this time, no grin, just the weight of someone who'd seen his own mortality and didn't quite know how to carry it. He stopped in front of her, looked down, then said simply, "I was wrong." Hadley studied his face, sunburned, thinner, honest for the first time. He swallowed hard. You saved my life when you didn't have to. You could have stayed behind cover. You didn't. His voice cracked and he shook his head. Hell, we all need to know it. You're the best damn soldier in this platoon. The men behind him murmured agreement, boots scuffing awkwardly. Hadley didn't smile, she just nodded once. You'd have done the same, she said quietly. Maybe, Doyle admitted, but you actually did. For the first time the respect felt real, not loud, not forced, just there. Later she found herself alone again, sitting by the airstrip as another convoy prepared to roll out. Engines roared. Soldiers checked weapons. The routine had returned, as if the ambush had been just another line in a long, unfinished story. But for Hadley, something subtle had shifted. The fear of being underestimated had burned away. What remained was purpose, steady, quiet, unshakable. She opened her field journal and wrote one line under the day's date. Every life saved writes a debt. Every death teaches why we can't stop trying. She closed the book, stood, and looked toward the horizon where the next mission waited. Somewhere out there, another ridge, another ambush, another chance to hold the line. The desert wind rose, tugging at her sleeves. She let it carry her grandfather's words one more time, faint but clear in her memory. Speed kills, but calm saves lives. She smiled, almost imperceptibly. Calm was something she had plenty of. And as the sun sank behind the hills, Specialist Hadley Pierce walked back toward the armory, ready to load up again. Why did it bother her that the ridge was too quiet? 2 weeks after the ambush, the patrols resumed. Different routes, different formations, same dread under the surface. Every soldier at Fob Ranger Point knew that the enemy didn't just disappear, they adapted. They waited. They whispered. Hadley Pierce sat in the back of a troop truck as it rumbled through the valley. The desert stretched endless in every direction, a landscape too wide for comfort. Heat shimmered off the rocks like ghosts trying to crawl out of the ground. To her left, Doyle sat silent, crutches resting between his knees. His face was drawn, eyes scanning the slopes beyond the window. He'd insisted on returning to duty early, refusing to be sidelined by injury. She respected that maybe more than she wanted to admit. You ever think about it? He asked suddenly. Hadley glanced over. Think about what? That day, the IED, the way they hit us, it felt organized. She frowned. Ambushes usually are. He shook his head. Not like that, that was precision. The timing, the angles, even the placement of the overwatch fire. Someone fed them our exact route. Her stomach tightened. You saying someone leaked it? I'm saying, Doyle said, leaning back, it wasn't luck. The truck jolted over a ridge, cutting off the conversation. But the thought stuck like a splinter. When they returned to base, she couldn't let it go. She found herself replaying the mission footage from her helmet cam, the explosion, the muzzle flashes, the patterns of attack. Every detail burned into memory. Something didn't add up. The ambush had hit their convoy mid-turn, a spot visible from only one side of the valley, which meant whoever triggered it knew exactly where they'd slow down. She paused the footage on a single frame, a glint in the distance, half a second before the explosion. Not sunlight, not reflection from their convoy, something higher up, a signal mirror, a lens. She sat back slowly, her chest felt hollow. Someone had been watching them. Later that night, she walked to the intel tent under a sky full of stars that looked too sharp to be real. Inside, the analysts were busy sorting through drone images. She caught the eye of Sergeant Lin, the unit's intelligence NCO, and dropped her data drive on the table. Run this, she said. Helmet cam Ridgeway ambush. Lin frowned. What are you looking for? Watch minute 12, top right corner of the ridge. Tell me what you see. He plugged it in, scrubbed through the footage, then froze it on the frame she'd marked. He leaned in. That's a reflection. From what? He zoomed in further, pixels breaking into static blocks. Could be a scope, could be a camera. She crossed her arms. You think they filmed us? Lin hesitated. If they did, it wasn't for bragging rights. It was recon footage. Someone studying your unit's movements. Her jaw clenched, so it's not over. Doesn't look like it. He met her eyes. You should tell your co. I will, she said, but inside her pulse quickened, not from fear, from focus. There was something about being underestimated that gave her clarity. The enemy thought she was just a medic. They were about to find out how wrong they were. 2 nights later, the platoon assembled for another convoy. The briefing room buzzed with unease. Every soldier had heard rumors about inside leaks, whispers that someone local, maybe even one of their interpreters, had been passing convoy times to insurgent cells. The mission tonight was part patrol, part trap. Sweep the western ridge, bait the enemy into revealing themselves. Lieutenant Briggs looked more worn than usual, voice tight as he outlined the plan. We're heading west towards Sector Delta. If contact happens, rules of engagement are the same. But we're not here for body counts, we're here for intel. Got it? Hadley nodded with the rest, but something in her gut twisted. Intel missions meant uncertainty, and uncertainty killed faster than bullets. When the convoy rolled out, the night was thick with heat and silence. No moon, no wind, just the hum of engines and the flicker of infrared lights on their helmets. She sat behind the driver, her med pack strapped tight, rifle across her knees. They drove for an hour before the radio crackled static, then a faint voice, local command, then silence again. Hadley's pulse jumped. That wasn't normal. The driver frowned. You hear that? Yeah, she said. Keep your speed steady. Doyle in the rear seat checked his weapon. Could be comm interference, or... He didn't finish. A sharp pop echoed ahead. The convoy stopped dead. Not an explosion this time, a single gunshot, far away, deliberate. Then came the whisper, not over the radio, from the hills, distant but human, bouncing across the rocks in the still night air. Who's picking us off? The words rolled like a curse through the dark. Hadley froze. It wasn't English. It was broken, accented, but the tone was unmistakable. Panic, confusion, enemy fighters talking to each other. And they were scared. Lieutenant Briggs barked orders over the comm. All vehicles, lights out, defensive formation. The soldiers spread out, scanning the ridges through night vision. Nothing, just shadows that moved when the heart wanted them to. Who's picking us off? The whisper came again, closer now. Then a burst of gunfire erupted to their left, wild, uncontrolled. Someone was firing blind into the dark. Hadley's hand tightened on her rifle. That's not us, she murmured. Harris's voice came through the comms. They're shooting at each other. The realization hit like cold water. The enemy was panicking. Something or someone was taking them out before the platoon even made contact. Stay sharp, Briggs warned. We're not alone out here. The gunfire sputtered out as suddenly as it began. Silence returned. Then faintly through the static of the night, they heard footsteps, soft, distant, fading downslope. Whoever had caused the chaos was gone. By dawn, the search teams found traces along the ridge, brass casings, boot prints that didn't match any coalition pattern, and 3 bodies. Insurgents. All shot cleanly through the chest, close-range, precision hits. Hadley crouched beside one of the corpses. Single shooter, she muttered. Tight grouping. Suppressed weapon, maybe subsonic rounds. Doyle knelt next to her. One person did this. Looks that way. He exhaled slowly. So now even the enemy's being hunted. She glanced at him, or warned. The thought hung between them like a storm cloud. She didn't know which answer frightened her more. Back at base, command dismissed the incident as an inter-faction conflict. But Hadley wasn't convinced. The insurgents hadn't been firing at ghosts, they'd been reacting to something. Something precise, surgical, someone who moved unseen. She stayed up late reviewing the footage from the body cams. Frame by frame, analyzing muzzle flashes, sound patterns, the direction of impacts. Every detail told a story. She couldn't prove it, but her instincts whispered one truth. Someone out there was cleaning up the loose ends of that ambush. And she wasn't sure whose side they were on. Days passed. The base routine returned, but the sense of unease lingered. Men spoke quieter now. Convoys left with heavier armor, tighter formations. The desert wind carried rumors, a shadow sniper, a ghost among the ridges. Some said it was one of theirs, a rogue operator avenging lost soldiers. Others swore it was a local ally gone dark. Hadley didn't speculate out loud, but she started spending more time at the range after hours, more time with her rifle, more time listening to the wind through her headset, trying to catch echoes of that whisper, "Who's picking us off?" Each time she closed her eyes, she saw it again, the blast, the blood, the ridge. And under it all, a feeling she couldn't shake. That vengeance had a heartbeat, and it was moving closer. The next briefing was short, quiet, almost secret. Only a small detachment this time, recon patrol, 6 soldiers, Hadley among them. Destination: the same valley where the first ambush took place. The mission: recover any remaining intel, clear potential sniper nests. Doyle was staying behind for once, still not cleared for full combat. Before she left, he caught her by the arm. "Pierce," he said, "don't go chasing ghosts. If there's someone out there playing our side, let Command handle it." She met his eyes. "You really think Command will care who's dying as long as it's not us?" He sighed. "Just promise me you won't do anything stupid." She smiled faintly. "You're talking to a combat medic. Stupid's kind of the job." And then she was gone. The desert was merciless that morning, sun already burning through the horizon, air shimmering with heat. Their boots crunched over gravel, rifles sweeping the ridges. Every step forward stirred up the ghosts of that ambush. Hadley led the medical overwatch, scanning for any sign of movement. The others moved with practiced silence. But when they reached the blast site, she stopped cold. The ground still bore scars, blackened craters, twisted metal, shreds of burned fabric half buried in the dirt. She knelt, tracing the edge of the crater with her glove. The soil here was disturbed recently. Someone had been digging. "Sergeant," she called, "you need to see this." The patrol leader came over, brow furrowing. "What is it?" She pointed to the shallow hole. Inside lay an empty casing, brass polished by hand. On its rim, a faint engraving. A set of initials. Her breath caught, not enemy script, English. She wiped the dirt away and read it aloud. HP. Her own initials. Who would carve her initials into a bullet? Hadley stared at the casing in her palm, sunlight flashing off its rim. The engraving was faint but deliberate, HP, not random, not accidental. Someone had done this knowing exactly what it meant. She turned it over once more, trying to make sense of the impossible. The others stood behind her, waiting. "Something wrong, Doc?" Sergeant Vega asked. She shook her head quickly and slipped the casing into her vest pocket. "Nothing, just debris." But her heartbeat betrayed her, faster now, louder. They cleared the rest of the ridge without contact. By midday, the sun had burned the color out of the valley, leaving everything washed in the same pale, lifeless hue. When they returned to the convoy trucks, Hadley couldn't focus on the chatter around her. Her mind replayed the moment on a loop, that whisper in the dark, "Who's picking us off?" The enemy's panic, the precision kills, and now this. A casing marked with her name. It wasn't coincidence. She told herself there had to be an explanation. Maybe a field prank. Maybe a soldier with the same initials. But the part of her that had spent years reading human behavior, body language, tone, the medic's instinct told her otherwise. Someone wanted her to find that bullet. Someone wanted her to know. Back at Fob Ranger Point, the rest of the team dispersed to debrief, but Hadley walked straight to her quarters. The door shut with a hollow clang, sealing her in the kind of silence that made thoughts louder. She sat on her cot, unzipped her vest, and laid the casing on the blanket. Even through the grime, the letters gleamed. She traced them again with a finger. The etching wasn't done with a knife too clean, probably a laser engraving tool. That meant access to specialized gear. Someone inside the base. Someone who knew her initials, her work, her place in the convoy that day. Her stomach twisted. The implication was simple and terrifying. Whoever had done this wasn't an outsider. They were one of them. Later that evening, she made her way to the operations tent. Sergeant Lin was still awake, running comm intercepts. His desk glowed faint green in the dim light of the monitors. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked without looking up. "Something like that." She waited until the tent was empty before pulling the casing from her pocket and setting it beside his keyboard. "Can you run prints on this?" Lin frowned. "Where'd you get it?" "Ridgeway site, dug near the old blast crater." He picked it up carefully, turning it under the lamp. "You realize this is NATO brass, right? Not local ammo. Standard 7.62. "Yeah," she said quietly. "I know." He gave her a long look. "You think one of ours left it there?" She didn't answer. He sighed. "I can run partials, but if this was handled with gloves, we won't get much." "Try anyway," she said, "and keep it between us." He hesitated, then nodded. "All right, Doc, but if this turns up something ugly." "I'll handle it." Her tone left no room for argument. Days passed with no result. Every night she lay awake listening to the hum of the base, distant voices, generators, the faint clink of metal against metal. She tried to bury herself in routine, medical checks, supply inventories, casualty drills. But even in the middle of work, she caught herself glancing at the ridges beyond the wire. Something was moving out there. On the third night, Lin found her in the mess hall long after curfew. He slid a sealed evidence bag onto the table. Inside, the casing. "No usable prints," he said. "But there's residue on the rim, oil from a suppressed weapon. New issue, not insurgent stock." Her pulse spiked. "So it's one of ours." "Could be anyone with access to armory-level gear," he said. "But here's the strange part. The residue has an additive compound, same type we use on weapons stored in cryo crates, which means the rifle hasn't been out long." She frowned. "Which units pulled from cryo storage recently?" "Just two," Lin said, lowering his voice. "Sniper Detachment Bravo and your med platoon." She froze. "My platoon?" "Yeah, command authorized temporary use for marksmanship familiarization training. But the log shows only one checked weapon never returned." "Who signed it out?" Lin hesitated. "That's the thing, the form's half filled. No name, just initials, HP." Her breath caught. "That's impossible," she said. "I never—" "I know," Lin interrupted. "I checked your record, no requisition. Someone used your ID stamp." Her mind raced. ID stamps were secure, encrypted, used for inventory tracking. For someone to clone hers, they'd need direct access to her field tablet or her biometric tag. Someone had copied her. Someone had turned her name into a weapon. The next morning, she was called into Lieutenant Briggs' office. The man looked tired, tension etched into every line of his face. "Specialist Pierce," he said, "I've been informed there's been an issue with equipment logs. Something about a missing weapon under your ID." She stood straight. "Yes, sir, I just found out myself." "Any idea how that happened?" "None, sir, my tag. Been with me the entire time." Briggs studied her for a moment, then sighed. "I believe you, but command starting to ask questions. Those insurgents turning up dead, someone thinks it's connected. Until we figure this out, you're off convoy rotations." Her chest tightened. "Sir, with respect, I'm the only medic qualified for long-range recon coverage." "I know," he said, "but this isn't a punishment, it's protection. If someone's framing you, we need to smoke them out." Hadley's jaw locked, but she nodded. "Understood." As she turned to leave, he added quietly, "Pierce, If you're sitting on anything that could explain what's happening, now's the time to speak up." She hesitated. The truth hovered on her lips, the casing, the whispers, the ghosts on the ridge, but something held her back. Until she knew who was behind it, she couldn't risk saying a word. That night she went to the firing range alone. The desert wind carried sand through the wire mesh, scattering across the shooting benches. She laid her rifle down, adjusted the scope, and stared through it at the paper silhouettes lined up 100 meters away. Each one looked like a question she couldn't answer. She fired once. The shot cracked sharp through the still air, a clean hit center mass. Again. By the fifth round, she lowered the weapon and exhaled. Her hands didn't shake. They never did. But her thoughts did, shifting, blurring between instinct and doubt. If someone was using her ID, her initials, her identity, why? To send a message, to protect her, to frame her. The answer came uninvited, a memory. Her grandfather's voice, the night before his last hospital stay. Sometimes, Hadley, people don't need saving. They need reminding that someone's still willing to fight for them. Was that what this was? A reminder, a warning. She packed her rifle and left the range just before midnight. As she passed the comms building, movement caught her eye, a flicker of light inside the old radio shack near the perimeter wall. It had been decommissioned months ago, replaced by the main relay. But tonight, the door stood slightly open. Hadley froze. Her training screamed to call it in, wait for backup, but her gut told her otherwise. She moved quietly, hand resting on the grip of her sidearm. The wind masked her footsteps. Inside, the room was dark except for the faint glow of a monitor, a laptop running on battery. The screen displayed footage, grainy night vision, panning over the same ridge where the ambush had happened. Her breath caught. It wasn't archived recon footage. It was recent. The timestamp read 400 hours yesterday. She stepped closer. On the screen, figures moved, insurgents, 4 of them. Then flashes, controlled, silent bursts. Each man dropped in sequence. The shooter wasn't visible, just a shadow moving like smoke between rocks. But the way they moved, the precision, it was surgical, familiar. Hadley felt the blood drain from her face. Whoever it was, they fought like someone who'd trained in combat medicine. Someone who knew anatomy, arteries, kill shots, pain points. Someone like her. She reached for the keyboard and froze. A voice came from behind her, low and steady. "I was wondering when you'd find this place." She turned slowly, weapon drawn. Doyle stood in the doorway, one crutch tucked under his arm, eyes calm. "Put it down, Doc," he said softly. "You're not gonna want to shoot me." Why did his voice sound calm when everything else inside her screamed chaos? Hadley didn't lower her weapon at first. Doyle stood framed in the doorway, a faint glow from the monitor washing his face in ghostly green. The same man she'd dragged from the dirt weeks ago, bleeding, broken, helpless, now looked like someone who'd already made peace with something unspeakable. Her hand trembled just once. "Talk," she said quietly, "now." He took one slow step inside, closing the door behind him. The metal latch clicked like a trigger. "You weren't supposed to find this," he said. "At least not yet." "What the hell is this, Doyle? Those bodies, that was you." He exhaled through his nose. "Me and a couple others. People who got tired of watching command write letters home for the men we lose because of bad intel." Hadley blinked. "You're running an off-book operation." "Call it what you want," he said. "We call it cleaning up." She kept the pistol trained on him. "You killed unarmed targets." "Unarmed?" He almost laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Those men set the IED that tore through our convoy. They killed Sergeant Leno, Corporal Whitaker, Rays. You remember their names, because I do. I hear them every damn night." The words hung heavy in the stale air. The monitor flickered, showing another still frame, a body sprawled across the rocks, dust rising around it like smoke. Hadley's voice dropped, low, trembling at the edge of disbelief. "So you carved my initials into a casing. Why?" Doyle looked at her for a long time. "Because you're the only one who deserves to know the truth. You saved me. You saved all of us. The least I could do was let you see what comes after." "What comes after?" she whispered. "You mean revenge?" He shook his head. "No, balance." The word made her chest tighten. He limped closer, his shadow stretching long across the dirt floor. "Command called the ambush a tactical failure, but we both know what it really was: betrayal. Someone inside the local security detail fed our convoy path to the insurgents. We traced it. We found the radio frequency. We confirmed the source." "And instead of reporting it," she began. He cut her off, voice hard. "Reporting it wouldn't change anything. They'd bury it like they always do. You've seen the paperwork shuffle, Doc. You think they'd risk political fallout to punish a handful of traitors? No, they'd call it fog of war and move on." Hadley lowered her weapon slightly, though her pulse still thundered in her ears. "You can't take justice into your own hands. That's not who we are." Doyle smiled sadly. "Maybe not who you are. But tell me, Hadley, when you held my leg together, when you stopped the bleeding, did you do it because it was protocol, or because you couldn't stand watching another one of us die for nothing?" Her breath caught. The silence stretched between them like a wire pulled too tight. "I did it because it was right," she said finally. He nodded slowly. "Then maybe this is right too, just in another language." She holstered her weapon, though her mind was far from calm. The air inside the shack felt thinner now, heavy with the weight of unspoken truths. "Who else knows?" she asked. "Two from Delta Platoon. Harris, maybe Lynn, nobody else." Her head snapped up. "Lynn, the intel sergeant." "Yeah," Doyle said. "He's been feeding us movement data, helping us find the cells tied to the ambush." Hadley's jaw tightened. "You're saying our own intelligence section is part of a revenge squad?" He didn't deny it. "We're not killers, we're cleaners. We don't go after families or civilians, just the ones who pulled the strings, the ones who planned what happened that day." She stared at him, trying to find the man she'd once despised, the loud, arrogant sergeant who'd mocked her for being too small, too soft. That man was gone. The one in front of her now was colder, older, hollowed out by guilt. "Why drag me into this?" she asked. "Because you deserve to know what your work bought us," Doyle said quietly. "Every night since you pulled me off that dirt, I've been asking myself why I lived and others didn't. And the answer hit me. I lived so I could do what the brass won't. Because somebody's got to look those bastards in the eye before they bleed out and remind them this isn't over." He looked down at his hands, calloused and shaking slightly. "You don't have to agree, you just have to understand." Hadley took a step back. "And what happens when command finds out? You think they'll see you as heroes? They'll court-martial every one of you." "Then we'll take the fall," he said simply. "Better that than watch another platoon walk into a trap." She looked at the monitor again. The footage looped, the same kills replaying in sterile green light. For the first time she noticed something else: the hesitation in the shooter's aim, the split second before each shot. Not rage, calculation, mercy almost. It made her stomach twist. "You're not soldiers anymore," she said softly. "You're executioners." He met her gaze, and for a heartbeat she saw pain, not anger, not pride, just exhaustion. "Maybe," he said, "but maybe the only difference between a medic and an executioner is what you do with the silence afterward." That night Hadley couldn't sleep. She sat outside her quarters with a cigarette she didn't light, staring at the empty horizon. The words replayed in her head: balance, betrayal, justice. In her chest, a storm was building: duty against empathy, law against conscience. Doyle was right about one thing: command didn't always tell the truth. But if soldiers started deciding who deserved to live or die, what line was left to protect them from becoming what they fought? She thought of her grandfather again, that steady voice over the crack of rifle fire outside the barn. Medics don't patch wounds just to stop the bleeding, Hadley. They do it to remind the world it's still worth saving. But was it still worth saving if it rotted from the inside? The next morning, she found Lynn waiting outside the med tent. He looked tired, dark circles under his eyes. "Rough night?" he asked. "Did you know?" she shot back. His expression faltered. "About what?" "The vigilante ops, Doyle, the killings." He didn't answer. That was answer enough. "Jesus, Lynn," her voice was barely a whisper. "You're supposed to be intelligence, not execution." He looked around to make sure no one was close. "Lower your voice. You don't understand, they weren't supposed to cross lines. It started as recon cleanup. Confirmed enemy combatants only. Then it just evolved." "Into murder," she said. "Into survival," he corrected. "Doc, those people would have hit us again. They were setting up another ambush 2 valleys over. We stopped it before it happened. You think command will ever admit that?" She stared at him, stunned by how easily he said it, how logical it sounded, how rationalized. "They're framing me," she said quietly. "Someone used my ID stamp. If this comes out, they'll think I'm part of it." Lynn sighed. That was Doyle's idea. He thought using your ID would throw off suspicion. He said no one would believe a medic could do something like that. Her pulse spiked. "He used me." "He protected you," Lynn said. "He made sure no trail led back to his squad. You're the reason he's alive, Pierce. This is his way of keeping you safe." "By turning me into his ghost signature," she snapped. "By keeping the wolves away from your door," he said quietly. "Look, I'm not asking you to approve, just don't expose him yet. If you go to command now, it's not just him they'll bury, it's everyone who followed him. Harass me, the guys who believed they were saving lives. You'll torch the whole platoon." Her throat tightened. "And if I do?" "Then you live with it," he said simply. "Same as the rest of us." That night Hadley walked the perimeter again. The moon was sharp, cutting through the haze. Every shadow looked like someone waiting to be judged. She stopped at the wire, staring out at the dark hills beyond. Somewhere out there were the same men Doyle had hunted, maybe more, maybe less. Somewhere, revenge was still burning. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the casing again. It glimmered under the moonlight. HP. Her initials, her identity, her burden now. She knelt in the dirt and pressed the casing into the ground until it disappeared. "Balance," she whispered. "You got it backward, Doyle. Balance isn't taking lives, it's keeping what's left from falling apart." But even as she said it, part of her knew the line between healer and avenger had already blurred. She stepped into the same shadow, whether she meant to or not. When she returned to her quarters, a folded note lay on her cot. No name, no address, just a single line written in Doyle's messy handwriting. "If they find us before I'm done, tell them we did it for the ones who never made it home." Her eyes burned, but she didn't cry. She folded the note again and tucked it into her pocket next to her ID tag. Then she sat in the darkness until the generators hummed into silence, the base asleep except for the guards on the wall. And somewhere out there, beyond the wire, she swore she could hear it again, that same whisper carried by the wind, fatting into the valley. "Who's picking us off?" Only this time, she wasn't sure who the enemy was anymore. How long could a secret hold before it turned into a confession? The dawn came pale and unforgiving. Fob Ranger Point stirred with the usual noise, engines starting, boots thudding across the gravel yard, the rattle of distant gunfire drills. But beneath it all ran something new. A current, a rumor. By mid-morning, word had spread across the base. An internal inquiry was coming. Hadley Pierce stood outside the med tent, coffee cooling in her hand, eyes on the horizon. Her stomach felt like stone. The night's conversation with Lynn replayed in fragments, Doyle's note, his calm voice, the footage of the shadowed shooter. Every second of it pressed down on her like a weight that had no shape but infinite gravity. She didn't have to ask what the inquiry was about. She already knew. The first call came before noon. Lieutenant Briggs appeared at the door of the med tent, clipboard in hand. He didn't meet her eyes right away. "Pierce," he said, "Command wants to see you." She nodded once. "Now." "Now." The walk to headquarters was short, but it felt like a mile. The corridors buzzed with radio chatter and nervous glances. Men she'd treated for shrapnel wounds or dehydration barely looked at her as she passed. Respect had turned into quiet distance. When she entered the operations room, 3 officers were waiting: Major Kessler from Division, a JAG investigator in crisp desert fatigues, and Briggs, standing stiff to one side. "Specialist Hadley Pierce," Kessler began, "take a seat." She did. The major set a folder on the table and opened it. "We've been reviewing reports from the past 30 days, particularly the off-record engagements in the Western Ridges. There's reason to believe certain personnel have conducted unauthorized lethal actions against local nationals. These actions have been linked to missing ordnance signed out under your identification." Hadley's throat went dry. "Sir, I can explain." Kessler held up a hand. "We're not accusing you yet, Specialist. We're asking for cooperation. You're one of the few with medical clearance, recon mobility, and access to encrypted tracking. We need to know who might have used your credentials." Her pulse pounded, but her voice stayed even. "Understood, sir." "Good, then start with this." He slid a photo across the table. It was the casing, the one she'd buried in the dirt, dug up, tagged, and photographed. Her initials gleamed under the evidence light. "Where did this come from?" the JAG officer asked. She hesitated. "The ridge, the old ambush site. I recovered it during routine clearance." "Why didn't you report it?" She met his eyes. "Because I didn't know what it meant yet." "Do you know now?" Hadley glanced down at the photo. She thought of Doyle's hollow stare, Lynn's quiet confession, the lives lost and avenged. Then she said, "No, sir, I don't." The silence that followed was suffocating. Kessler's tone softened. "You've got a solid record, Pierce. Bronze Star nomination pending. Don't throw it away covering for someone else. If there's something you're not telling us, now's the time." She didn't move. "Permission to continue my duties until the inquiry concludes, sir." He studied her for a moment, then nodded reluctantly. "Granted, but stay close to base. No field assignments until cleared." She saluted, turned, and walked out. Every step felt heavier than the last. Outside, the light was too bright. She blinked against it, the world blurring into heat, shimmer, and dust. Briggs caught up to her halfway down the steps. "You didn't tell them," he said quietly. She shook her head. "Why?" "Because the truth doesn't fix anything," she said. He sighed. "You know they're not gonna stop digging, right? Command doesn't like ghosts, they like scapegoats, and right now you're wearing the target." She stared at him. "Then maybe they'll finally look where they're supposed to." Briggs looked like he wanted to argue, but he didn't. "Just be careful, Doc. Secrets have a way of bleeding out." For 3 days the base operated like a coiled spring. Interrogations, audits, surprise inspections. Soldiers whispered in corners. Radios buzzed with tension. Hadley went about her duties as if nothing had changed, patching blisters, replacing IV bags, cleaning bloodstains that refused to come out. But inside she was unraveling. Every knock on the door made her heart jump. Every glance from an officer felt like an accusation. She hadn't done anything wrong, not exactly, but silence was its own kind of guilt. And Doyle was gone. He hadn't been seen since the night she found the shack. His bunk was stripped bare, his weapon missing. Command listed him as extended recon detail, but no one believed it. Not really. Lynn avoided her now too. His station was always empty when she passed. Whatever fragile alliance they'd shared had cracked the moment Command got involved. The isolation gnawed at her. Even the men she'd saved during the ambush kept their distance. Not out of fear, out of confusion. How do you thank someone when you're not sure if they're the reason you're still alive or the reason someone else is? On the fourth night, a message came through her secured line. No name, no call sign, just coordinates, familiar ones. The ridge. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. It could have been bait, a trap, or a plea. She packed her gear anyway. The desert at night was a world of whispers, sand hissing under her boots, wind sliding through the rocks like breath through broken teeth. The moon hung low, painting everything in silver and shadow. When she reached the ridge, she saw the faint glow of a lantern near the old crater. Doyle sat beside it, his rifle across his knees. "You shouldn't be here," she said. He smiled faintly. "Neither should you. You know they're looking for you." "Let them look," he said. "I'm done hiding." She stepped closer. "What's this then, your confession?" He looked up at the sky, the endless, indifferent dark. "Something like that." "Then say it," she said. "Say what you did. Say why you dragged me into it." He took a deep breath. "Because I needed someone to remember us for what we were before all this, before the politics, before the lies. You were the last honest thing left in this place, Doc. I wanted to keep you that way." She stared at him. "You used my name to cover your tracks." He nodded. "Yeah, and I'd do it again. Because if they traced it to me, they'd burn every file, erase every name, and pretend none of it ever happened. At least with your name, they had to look." She shook her head slowly. "You can't justify this." "I'm not trying to." His voice broke soft. "You think I sleep after what I've done. You think I don't see their faces. I do, every night. But I also see ours, the ones we lost. Leno, Whitaker, Ray's, I see them too. And I'd rather be damned with them than live knowing I did nothing." For a long moment, the only sound was the wind. Hadley's throat tightened. "They'll kill you for this, Doyle." He gave a tired smile. "Maybe, but at least it'll mean someone finally listened." He reached into his pocket and handed her a small drive. "Everything's on here, names, frequencies, proof of the leak. Give it to whoever still believes in justice. That's not me anymore." She hesitated, then took it. The metal was cold against her palm. "What are you going to do?" she asked. He looked out toward the horizon, eyes unfocused. "Finish what I started." "Don't," she said softly. "Don't make me your witness." "You already are," he said. And then he was gone, slipping into the darkness, a ghost swallowed by his own silence. By the time she returned to base, dawn was breaking. The world looked the same, but something inside her had shifted beyond repair. She went straight to the comms tent, found Briggs waiting with a cup of coffee and a look that said he hadn't slept either. "Where have you been?" he asked. "Out." "Doing what?" "Finishing a conversation." He studied her, then nodded toward her clenched hand. "What's that?" She hesitated, then she placed the drive on the table. "Evidence." He raised an eyebrow. "Of what?" She looked him in the eye. "The truth." When the investigators returned later that morning, they didn't expect what she gave them. Names, coordinates, communication logs, the full map of betrayal and vengeance. But she left out one thing. She never said who delivered it. When they asked how she'd acquired the data, she said simply, "It came from the dead." That night the base was quiet again, too quiet. Word spread fast, arrests, court-martials pending, operational silence imposed. But Doyle wasn't on the list. No one ever found him. Hadley sat outside her tent, watching the sun sink behind the same ridge where everything had begun. The wind kicked up, soft but steady, brushing her hair across her face. For the first time in weeks, she let herself cry, not from guilt, not from anger, but from something deeper. Grief for what the uniform couldn't protect, conscience. When the tears dried, she whispered to the empty horizon, "Sometimes, saving a life means losing part of your own." Then she stood, straightened her vest, and walked back toward the med bay, where the next casualty would be waiting, because the war never paused for moral clarity. What does justice look like when no one's brave enough to say its name? 3 days after she turned in the evidence, Specialist Hadley Pierce became a ghost inside her own base. The inquiry was over, but the silence that followed said more than any verdict could. Files were sealed, names redacted. The official statement read, "Unauthorized activity by unknown personnel. Situation resolved internally." Internally. That word made her stomach twist. It meant buried. She spent the mornings at the aid station, wrapping wounds and changing dressings for men who still didn't meet her eyes. By night, she'd sit near the perimeter wall, listening to the hum of the desert, the low, eternal whisper of wind through barbed wire and rock. It was the only sound that didn't lie. Sometimes she thought she saw him, Doyle, just past the ridgeline, a flicker of movement under moonlight. She knew it wasn't real, but she didn't chase it away either. The human mind, she'd learned, had a way of keeping ghosts around just long enough to finish the conversation you never got to have. By the end of the week, the base changed hands. New command rotation, fresh faces, cleaner files. Major Kessler was reassigned, and the new Captain Rains, arrived with the clipped precision of someone sent to make messes disappear. He gathered the platoon in the motor pool, boots lined up, rifles slung, eyes forward. The speech was short, surgical. "We're moving forward. No more investigations, no more rumors. Whatever happened out there is done. I expect professionalism, and I expect silence." The word echoed like a gunshot. When the formation broke, Hadley turned to leave, but Rains stopped her. "Pierce, a word." She followed him into the operations tent. The air smelled of dust and disinfectant. He leaned against the map table, studying her like a problem to be solved. "You were close to Sergeant Doyle," he said flatly. She didn't flinch. "He was in my squad." "He's still missing." "I know." "You wouldn't happen to know where he went?" "No, sir." He paused. "You turned in data that exposed several soldiers, yet none of the names you gave are in the final report." "That wasn't my decision." "I didn't say it was." His tone softened just slightly. "I'm not here to judge what you did, Specialist. I'm here to tell you what it cost." Her stomach sank. "Who?" He nodded toward the window. "Sergeant Lynn, found dead this morning. Self-inflicted, they think. He left a note, but JAG won't release it." The words hit like a rifle butt to the chest. "No, that's not Lynn wouldn't." "I'm sorry," Rains said quietly. "I know he was your friend, but this is what happens when people start believing truth and loyalty can live in the same trench. Eventually, one shoots the other." He straightened. "You did the right thing, Pierce, but understand something: the Army doesn't reward right, it rewards quiet." Her throat tightened. "Understood, sir." "Good." He handed her a transfer slip. "You're being reassigned. Forward Medical Detachment, Jalawar District, dust-off team rotation, effective immediately." She stared at the paper. "That's frontline medevac. High risk, high need, you'll fit." And just like that, the conversation was over. She left the tent in a daze. The wind picked up again, scattering fine dust through the yard. Her hands shook as she folded the paper, slipped it into her pocket, and walked toward the barracks. Lynn gone. Doyle gone. Every trace of truth she tried to protect erased, rewritten, sanitized. She sat on the edge of her cot, staring at her packed rucksack. Her eyes drifted to the note Doyle had left, the one she'd kept tucked in her breast pocket for days. "If they find us before I'm done, tell them we did it for the ones who never made it home." She traced the words with her thumb until they blurred. Then she folded the note, placed it inside her field journal, and zipped it shut. Some debts could only be paid in silence. Her transfer came the next morning. She boarded the medevac Blackhawk just after dawn. the air still cool enough to breathe without tasting sand. The new detachments patch hadn't even been sewn on her sleeve yet, a blank square where identity used to live. As the helicopter lifted off, she looked down at the shrinking base, rows of tents and vehicles glowing gold in the rising sun. For a moment she felt lighter, not free exactly, just less anchored to the weight of memory. The crew chief handed her a headset. "You ever fly dust off before?" "Not officially," she said. He grinned. "Then you'll learn fast. Out here we don't get second tries." The next 6 weeks blurred together. Dust-offs, trauma calls, tourniquets and rotor wash, and the metallic taste of adrenaline. She worked like someone chasing pennants, steady, efficient, detached. When the rotors spun, she was in her element. When they stopped, she was just a woman who couldn't sleep. Sometimes, on long flights back to base, she'd close her eyes and hear the echoes of that whisper through her headset, the one that started it all. "Who's picking us off?" The question haunted her, but the answer had changed. Maybe it wasn't the enemy whispering anymore. Maybe it was what was left of her conscience. One night the call came in just after midnight. Convoy hit outside Jalawar, 2 wounded, 1 critical. The helicopter banked hard over the desert. Through the open side door, the world looked like an ocean of black sand. She could see the burning wreck below, a single flare marking the landing zone. They touched down under small arms fire. Hadley jumped out, ducking low, running toward the nearest body, a young private, maybe 19. Shrapnel to the shoulder. Breathing fast, panicked. She pressed gauze, wrapped him tight, pushed morphine into his vein, whispered steady things she didn't believe anymore. "Stay with me, kid. You're fine, you're fine." He was. The second casualty was. The man lay half under the twisted frame of a Humvee, blood soaking the dirt around his waist. Hadley dropped to her knees, sliding her hands under the wound, high, deep, catastrophic. Femoral artery. 4 minutes, maybe less. And then she saw his face. It wasn't an enemy. It wasn't even a stranger. It was Doyle. Her body froze. For a second she couldn't breathe. He looked older, thinner, the tan uniform stripped of rank patches, no name tape, no insignia. But it was him. His eyes fluttered open. "Doc." Her hands moved automatically. Tourniquet high and tight, compress pack seal. "You stupid son of a," her voice cracked, "what did you do?" He smiled weakly. "Guess I couldn't stay gone forever." "Don't talk," she said, pressing harder. "You're gonna make it." He shook his head slowly. "No, I'm not, you know that." "Shut up and let me work." "Still bossy," he murmured. Then his hand caught hers, blood slick, trembling. "Listen to me, the leak, it's still out there. I went looking, found the real source." "Stop talking." "Rains," he whispered. "Your new he's not here to clean up, he's here to erase." Her breath hitched. "What?" "He's the one who fed the coordinates that day. It wasn't the locals. It was him. Politics, contracts, they wanted chaos to justify expansion. We were expendable." "Doyle." He coughed, blood seeping from his lips. "I tried to fix it, got caught. Guess they decided to finish the job." "Don't, please don't." He smiled faintly, eyes half closed. "You were right, Doc. Balance isn't taking lives, it's keeping what's left from falling apart." Then his hand went still. The wind howled through the rotors above. She pressed her palm against his chest, waiting for the rise that never came. Her voice broke. "No, not you, not again." The crew chief's shout cut through the roar. "We have to lift now." She nodded numbly, wiping her face with the back of her glove, and climbed aboard as the helicopter lifted off. Below, the firelight swallowed the ridge, the same cursed valley, now claiming its last debt. Back at base, she filed the report herself. KIA, no identification, no survivors. She listed the body as unknown civilian combatant. Then she took the flash drive Doyle had once given her, the one that had started everything, and plugged it into the secure terminal. It opened to one file. A name, Captain Marcus Raines, and a list of encrypted transmissions linking him to contractors, kickback payments, and falsified mission briefs. The proof Doyle died for. Her hand hovered over the keyboard. She could forward it straight to Division Command, a simple upload, one keystroke. But she knew what would happen next. It would vanish. Raines would vanish. The Army would protect itself like a living organism, devouring infection by absorbing it. Truth didn't survive paperwork. She unplugged the drive instead and slipped it into her pocket. At dawn, she walked to the edge of the landing pad, watching the helicopters lift into the growing light. The wind tugged at her hair, the desert stretching endless and merciless. She opened her fist. The flash drive gleamed in the sun, small enough to hide, heavy enough to break a heart. Then, without a word, she tossed it into the fire pit near the hangar. The plastic melted quick, the metal slower. When it was gone, she whispered, "Rest now, Sergeant, I'll carry it." And for the first time in months, she felt something like peace, not clean, not whole, but real. The kind of peace that came from knowing you couldn't fix the world, only stop it from bleeding out completely. That night, she wrote her final journal entry under the dim light of a field lantern. There's no medal for mercy, no citation for choosing silence, but maybe in the end that's what keeps us human, the parts we protect even when no one's watching. She closed the book, set her rifle beside her, and leaned back against the cot. Outside, the wind whispered again, softer now, almost kind. And in that sound, she heard it one last time. "Who's picking us off?" Her answer came in a whisper of her own. "No one anymore." How long does it take for a war to end? Some said it ended the moment the last shot was fired. But for specialist Hadley Pierce, it ended 6 months later, in a quiet hospital ward 2,000 miles from the desert, where the smell of antiseptic had replaced the scent of sand and gun oil. The war hadn't left her body yet. It clung to her in invisible ways, in the tremor that lived just beneath her skin, in the way she flinched at the metallic clink of dropped instruments, in the ghosts that sometimes followed her into dreams. The Army called it rotation fatigue. Her doctors called it survivor's syndrome. She called it something simpler, debt. The kind that never stops accruing. She'd been medically reassigned to a stateside trauma center near Fort Carson, the same base where her journey had begun. Her Bronze Star citation hung on the wall outside the ward, polished and meaningless. Every day she passed it on her way to work, and every day it reminded her that heroism was just a word invented by people who never had to earn it. Her days were predictable now. IV drips, blood bags, the rhythm of beeping monitors. The chaos of the battlefield had been replaced by the slow hum of life trying to mend itself. And yet there were moments in the pause between heartbeats, in the sterile silence between surgeries, when she missed the roar of the rotors, the clarity of fear, the purity of purpose. Out there she had known exactly who she was. Here she was still trying to remember. One afternoon, she was restocking supplies when a soldier limped into the ward, a cane tapping the floor with each step. His uniform was pressed, his sleeves rolled high, revealing scars that mapped his forearms like pale roads. "Excuse me," he said, clearing his throat. "I'm looking for Specialist Pierce." Hadley turned, ready to ask who was asking, and froze. It was Doyle, of course, but the eyes were the same, steady, weathered, carrying the weight of someone who'd seen too much and survived just enough. "I'm her," she said. The man extended an envelope. "I was told to deliver this to you personally, said it was from a friend." She hesitated before taking it. "Who told you?" He shrugged. "Guy from Jalawar said if I ever made it back I'd know who it was for." Then he gave a respectful nod. and left without another word. Hadley stood there for a long time before she opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. 2 sentences, written in familiar, shaky handwriting. Some debts are better carried by the living. Don't let them bury us twice. A D. Beneath it, folded into the envelope, was a photograph, an old one. Their squad at Ranger Point. Lena, Whitaker, Reyes, Doyle, Harris, Lynn, and her. All laughing, covered in dust, posing beside the MRAP with their arms slung over each other's shoulders. Before the whispers, before the fire, before the world turned gray. Her hands trembled as she traced their faces. For a moment, it felt like the photo might disintegrate, too fragile to survive one more breath. She folded it carefully, placed it inside her journal, and closed her eyes. Weeks passed. She didn't tell anyone about the letter. Some truths she'd learned weren't meant to be shared, only carried. But the words lingered, reshaping something inside her that had been cracked for too long. So she began writing again. Not reports, not incident logs, but stories. Real ones. About the men who'd fought beside her. About the medics who patched lives together in the dark. About the women who held the line in ways no one ever saw. She wrote at night, when the ward was quiet and the only light came from the red glow of the exit sign. Her pen moved like confession. She wrote about the smell of blood drying on sand, about the weight of a body that once laughed at your jokes, about courage that didn't shout and fear that never left. And she wrote about Doyle, not the man command would remember, but the one she knew, the one who believed balance could be found in the gray between mercy and justice. Each story she finished felt like a stitch closing a wound that had never healed right. Months later, she received a call from an old contact, a journalist embedded in the early Koresh campaigns. The voice on the line was cautious, reverent. "Pierce," he said, "we're putting together a series on combat medics, real stories, uncensored. Heard you've been writing. You want your name attached." She stared out the window, watching rain streak down the glass. For years, she'd fought to prove she belonged in uniform. Now, she wasn't sure she wanted her name in print at all. "Not my name," she said softly, "just the story." The man hesitated. "What should we call it?" She thought for a moment, then smiled faintly. "Call it what they whispered that night." He didn't understand then. But when the series aired months later, the title read, "Who's Picking Us Off? The Forgotten Line Between Healing and War." The world called it brave, honest, raw. She called it overdue. Years passed. The war rolled on under new names, new acronyms, new faces repeating old mistakes. But Specialist Hadley Pierce faded quietly into the background, promoted once, then discharged honorably, her file stamped non-deployable, medical trauma. She bought a small ranch outside Cheyenne, the same land her grandfather once walked, now wild with grass and wind. There were mornings when the horizon glowed gold, the same color as that valley halfway across the world. And there were nights when the silence pressed too close, when she'd wake sweating from dreams where she was running through smoke, hands slick with blood that wasn't hers. But the nightmares always ended the same way, with a whisper carried through the static of memory. "You held the line, Doc." And she'd wake with tears drying on her cheeks, whispering back, "I tried." One spring morning, a convoy of military vehicles rolled down her dirt road. She stepped out onto the porch as a pair of officers approached, dress uniforms sharp against the Wyoming sky. "Specialist Pierce?" the younger one asked. She smiled faintly, retired but yes. The older officer handed her a folded flag and a letter embossed with the seal of the Department of the Army. "Ma'am," he said, "this is to inform you that the department has posthumously awarded Sergeant Nathan Doyle the Distinguished Service Cross for actions not previously recorded, resulting in the saving of multiple lives in Koresh Province." Hadley's breath caught. "When?" Last month, he said, his remains were recovered near Jalawar Ridge. There was a note. He hesitated, then handed it over. Her fingers shook as she unfolded it. The handwriting was faint, weathered by heat and time. Doc, if they ever read this, it means I finally stopped running. You told me once that dignity doesn't speak. It acts. I hope this counts. Her vision blurred. The wind shifted, catching the corner of the letter and flapping it softly like a heartbeat. She nodded, voice low. Yeah, Doyle, it counts. The officers saluted, then left her alone with the flag, the letter, and the sound of the wind through the grass. That evening she sat by the fence line, the mountains glowing orange in the distance. She took out her old journal, the one that still smelled faintly of desert dust and antiseptic, and opened it to the last blank page. Her hand hovered over the paper for a long time before she began to write. Maybe this was never about vengeance. Maybe it was about remembrance, about the people who fought not because they hated what was in front of them, but because they loved what was behind them. She paused, looking out across the field, the sky stretching wide and endless. Some wars don't end when the shooting stops. They end when someone chooses to remember with honesty instead of anger, when someone finally says, "We were flawed, but we tried." She smiled, closing the journal gently. Then, as the last light faded, she whispered to the wind, half prayer, half goodbye. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. The wind carried the words away, across the open land, over the hills, and into the horizon, where the echoes of gunfire had long since quieted. But the memory of one small medic who refused to quit still lingered like the last heartbeat of a fading war.